Hi everyone, Crista here with another episode of the Barefoot Genealogist. Today's topic is common mistakes in genealogy. Now there's a lot of them, and all of us were beginners at one point, and so don't feel bad if some of these you can identify with, but the point is just to make you aware of them so that you can learn as you go and correct some of the errors that you might be making. The first one is that genealogy is spelled Genealogy. There's not an O in the middle of that word. Now I say that a little tongue-in-cheek, but a lot of times when you're posting on forums or message boards or on Facebook, if you misspell that word, people will jump on you, so just a little tip. Today we're going to talk about 5 specific mistakes that a lot of beginners make in family history. They're in no particular order, though they do kind of connect with one another, and we'll talk about that as we go. As always, if you are watching this live, you can join me immediately following the broadcast on chat, where I can answer any questions that you have. If you're watching an archived version of this presentation, feel free to email at ask@ancestry.com. I will be doing a follow-up called More Common Mistakes in Genealogy in August, and so if you have questions between now and then, maybe I can work some of those into that presentation. With that introduction, let's get started. So, other than misspelling genealogy, one of the first mistakes that a lot of us make when we're doing family history is assuming that our family name is only spelled one way. I think I've shared this story before, but I have had a roommate years ago when I was in college where I helped her do some genealogy research, and we were sitting in the family history library in Salt Lake, and I found what I thought was her great-grandfather. And the very first words out of her mouth were, "Well, that can't be him. His name is spelled differently." And so it took a little convincing, because she had convinced herself, or someone in her family had convinced her, that everybody who spelled it the way she spelled it was related, and everybody who had spelled it this other way was not related. And that is absolutely not the case. Different branches of the family sometimes spell the name differently. Spelling was not something that was hugely important a long time ago. And so, or even a short time ago. I have relatives as recently as 2 generations ago who spelling was either difficult for them, or they didn't finish grammar school. And so it just wasn't critical. Until we started filling out a lot of government documents ourselves, there was very little uniformity of spelling. And so it's very possible that siblings in the same family ended up with different spelling names. So here's what I would recommend. The first thing I would recommend is to make a list. Make a list of all the possible different ways that you can spell your last name. And then look at that list based on how you would enter it into a search engine. So my last name is Cowan. Cowan is most often misspelled C-O-W-E-N, C-O-W-I-N. And so those are the 3 major ways that it's spelled. A-N-E-N-I-N. So one of the things that I can do is I can actually use a wildcard in the place of that last vowel. The wildcards on Ancestry.com are a question mark, which replaces a single character, or an asterisk, which replaces multiple characters. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say restrict that exactly, so that it only shows me words that are spelled C-O-W something N. And that's how I would check off those 3 alternate spellings on my surname. Now, one of the other ways that my surname is sometimes spelled and pronounced is C-O-H-E-N. I'm often called Crista Cohen. Maybe it's because of my fascination with Jewish genealogy, but my name is actually pronounced Cowan. But just because your name is pronounced just because you pronounce your name some way, doesn't mean that all of the descendants of all of the ancestors you have always pronounced it that way. So again, think about not just misspellings, but possible mispronunciations that would then lead to that, okay? Then one of the other things that happens is sometimes people mishear. So my last name is Cowan, but if you say it quickly, or you say it over the phone, or somebody is not paying attention, or if you say it with an accent, sometimes people hear my last name as Colin. I often get that when I'm making reservations at a restaurant over the phone. And so, again, think about ways that people might mishear or misspell your last name. Now, we do that not because the records are always wrong. So sometimes the records are wrong and sometimes the transcriptions are wrong. So think about all of those different possibilities. A lot of times you'll end up with names where, especially if you have double consonants, a double consonant will get dropped. The second consonant will get dropped. There are sometimes names that get spelled, like the fancy L. And my great-grandfather's last name sometimes looks like an S, and so I might search for Lawrence as well as Sorens, or I could just put a question mark for that as a wild card for that first category, or for that first letter. So that's just some of the ways that you can use search to help accommodate for all the possible different spellings and misspellings and respellings or creative spellings of your last name. There are some other search options here. If you use the default settings, what we're going to do, what Ancestry.com is going to do for you is return not just the ways that it's spelled, but all the possible options that we have seen for that misspelling, or for that spelling for that name. There are some other options here. You can also just restrict it just to soundex, just to phonetic, or this one is always amusing to me, names with similar meanings or spellings. So if your family came from a different country, it's very possible that when they got to the United States, they didn't really change their last name so much as translate it. So the Blanco family became the Whites, okay? And think about what some of those translations may have been so that you're looking for some of those options as well. Okay, too much time spent on mistake number 1, but this was not meant to be an exhaustive explanation, just mostly to get your brain thinking about some of the ways that we sometimes approach family history. So don't assume that your family name is only spelled one way. Mistake number 2 has to do with jumping to conclusions. Now, this is really easy to do in family history. We find a record and we get so excited and we think, oh, that's it. That's what I'm going to do. That's the right path that I'm taking. But the reality is that sometimes we don't know what it is that we're looking for. For example, if I was looking for the father of George Washington Lawrence, I might find a record where George Washington Lawrence is listed in a census as a child. Let's put in a location here that'll narrow this down a little bit. Where George Washington Lawrence is listed in a census record as a child, but I don't know who his parents are. And so I have several options. As I look at these two options here, let's look at this one and let's look at this one. I use this little trick and I sometimes feel the need to just pause and tell you what I'm doing. I often right-click on links and will open them in a new tab. And I do that because that way I don't lose my search results and have to keep going back and forth. It also allows me to take two separate records and just compare them very quickly. So that's a right click on a link and then you can open it in a new tab. So that's what I do. So when you look at something, don't just assume, well, my George Lawrence was born in 1869, so this must be him, because 1870 is awfully close. You need to know more about the person. You need to know more about them before you can jump to that conclusion or make that assumption that George and Sarah are his parents or that James and Francis are his parents. And so here's my recommendation. A lot of times we find a record and we're not sure, and so we have to do some more research. Maybe we need to go look at his obituary and see who it lists as his siblings before we can make a decision about whether or not we're on the right trail. Maybe we need to go find a death certificate and see if it lists the names of his parents. But we don't want to lose this record. And so we give you the option to save this record. The challenge is that a lot of us get all excited about saving the record to the person in the tree that we found. And I would recommend that you don't do that. And here's why. When you save a record to a tree, Ancestry automatically starts hinting to you other records we think are for that person based on the information you shared here. Also, when you save this record to a person in your tree, immediately we start looking at these other people as if they were members of that family. And if you're not sure that this is your person now, it's gonna mess with your hints. It's gonna mess with some of the way that your family tree is structured. You might lose your place or get confused. And so I would recommend that you don't do that. There is an option here to save a record to your shoebox. Now, the shoebox is just a place where you can store records so that you can go back and look at them later, right? So you can come back and say, you know what, I looked at this, I've found more information, this isn't him, get rid of it. Or, I looked at this is him, I'm going to attach it to the tree, and then I can remove it from my shoebox. This shoebox was never meant to be just a storage box of every record you ever had. The shoebox was meant to be a place where you could bookmark or save records for future reference. And so I would recommend really strongly that you use that shoebox to save those records that you're not sure about, rather than attaching them to the person. Because the other thing that happens when you attach them to that person is that sometimes you end up making the next mistake, which is researching the wrong family. Now, I tell this story in my family, and it's not to disparage anybody, but it's a very common mistake. So my mother did a lot of family history when I was very young, and one of the things that she did was she hand wrote everything on those old pedigree chart forms. And she had her grandfather. She was not sure who his father was, and she did some research, and she found a possible candidate for the parents of her grandfather. And because she wasn't sure, what she did was she wrote it in pencil. She wrote it in pencil on the pedigree chart so that she knew that she hadn't proven that yet. And then life happened. She got busy. She was raising a family, and she was doing a lot of things in the community, and so she didn't get back to it right away. Well, she had a cousin who came to her and said, you know, hey, I've gotten interested in family history, and I understand you used to do some of that. Can I just get copies of what you've done, and then I'll spend some time working on it? He was in the military and had the opportunity to be back in Washington, D.C. near the National Archives, and so she was thrilled to share this information with him. And so they took these old pedigree charts, the big rectangular ones, the old pedigree charts and the family group sheets that she had put together, and they took them down to a local copy shop, and they Xerox copied everything. And as you can imagine, when it was copied, it was a little more difficult to tell that these two names had been written in pencil as opposed to being written like everything else was in pen. And so he took that and he started chasing the family tree and did a lot of research. And another one of the cousins in the family got a copy from him, and she started tracing the family tree. And it ended up being, when I inherited the family history, my mom and I were going through it just to refresh her memory about what she had done so many years earlier. And she reminded me, she said, you know, this relationship right here has never been proven. She said it was a possibility or a hypothesis that I developed based on a couple of records that I had found, but I hadn't proven it out yet. And she said, maybe that's a place where you can start. And so I started digging into it, and sure enough, these were the wrong parents. And so years of research had been done by other people in the family, chasing the wrong family. And I had even done some research on some of the other people back on branches of that family without knowing that that one key relationship was never proven. So that's how it happened on paper forms. There are a lot of ways that it happens online. And that brings me to mistake number 4, which is kind of a touchy subject. It is relying on the family trees of others. And it doesn't matter if those family trees are on Ancestry.com or if they're on their own website or if they're in a book. It doesn't matter. The reality is that when we rely on the research of others without checking for sources, without looking to see how they did their research, without verifying the information, without even looking to see if the information is possible, then we could end up making that mistake number 3, where we're spending lots of time and energy, and in some cases a lot of money, where I ordered certificates, and I ordered copies of wills and copies of pension files, all on that wrong family. So relying on the family trees of others has its place. Do not get me wrong. Collaboration, I think, is a great thing. As a matter of fact, we have an entire Collaborate tab on Ancestry.com. We want you to connect with other researchers through the message boards. We want you to look at the member directory and see who else is researching the same surnames in the same places. We want you to use this member connect activity. As a matter of fact, it shows up in a lot of different places. You can access it here. Several of you have it on your home page as a widget. If you scroll down just a little bit, mine's down here near the bottom, where I can see exactly what other people have done or are doing with records that match people in my tree. And you can also find it when you're accessing actual records. So let me just show you an example. Several people don't understand what this is or how this works. When I am in a census record, a lot of times my screen might look like this. And several of you have complained that you lost some of your real estate for your census image. And what's happened is that we've just given you an index down here at the bottom, and then we've also given you a connection panel over here. You can get rid of those just by clicking once on these tiny little gray arrows, and it will pop those out, and then you can zoom in and zoom out on your image as much as you want. But these windows serve a purpose, and the purpose is that we tell you other people who have looked at this record, okay, or other people who are researching. So for example, I could look up the Lawrence message board here, or there are 8 other researchers who have listed in their profiles that they are researching Lawrence's in Arkansas. As I scroll up and down this index, what we're going to discover is that this side panel over here is going to change. So if I was looking at the record for Susan Williams, it will show me other records that might be relevant to Susan Williams. It will also show me other people who have saved this record in their tree. So it's just another way to get into trees. Rather than going through hints or going through search results, once you find a record that you know is your ancestor, look and see who else has attached that specific record to their tree. And what you can do then is see what other records, if any, and in this case she's got a couple of census records here attached to the tree. You can look at this information and see if it makes sense to you. So in this case, she has parents listed. Maybe I knew that, maybe I didn't. It gives me some siblings here, some information about her mother's maiden name, right? So all of that is information that I could attach to my tree. But personally, I love trees, and I love that other people are doing trees, but I prefer to use this information as clues to do my own research. I'm going to go look at every one of these records that she's attached to John Wharton Williams to see if it makes sense to me. And then I'm going to attach those same records. So rather than just copying this information or attaching this person to my tree, what I really want to do is look at the records they've attached, make sure that those really are for the right person, that the person doing this research knew what they were doing, and then I'm going to attach these records to my tree. So that's how I use trees. I think they're wonderful. Some of the greatest breakthroughs I have made has been on the shoulders of other researchers. And so I love that all these trees are available both online here at Ancestry.com. I use Google a lot to search other websites to see where other people have posted trees. I use library books, I use Google Books, there are lots of other places where there's online books and offline books that have biographies and family histories. I search for those, but I always do my own research to make sure that I'm not making this mistake of researching the wrong family, jumping to conclusions, or relying solely on the family trees of others to help me tell my own family story. And that leads us to our final common genealogy mistake of the day, which is failing to document your sources. Now, this may seem a little bit overwhelming to some of you, especially if you're new to this. This may seem a little bit academic to some of you who are just doing this for fun, and that's fine. But here's some of the pitfalls of failing to document your sources. One thing is you could end up looking for or at the same records over and over again if you didn't know you'd already looked at it. And Ancestry.com has made it fairly simple to just attach these records so that you know, I found this 1860 census, it really is for this person, I've attached it, and then we create the source citation for you, right? The information is actually in the record, specifically here, right underneath the save button. This is the source citation. We tell you exactly what the information is, where it came from, where you could go to view an original image if you want. We provide additional data in a description here underneath that. So if you've attached that record, you've cited your sources. You can do that on your online tree on Ancestry.com. You can do that in Family Tree Maker, or if you're using another software program, you can do that manually using the templates that they've created as well. The purpose of citing your sources, there's several, but one is so that you don't redo your own work. One is so that you know what it is that you're still looking for. If I hadn't attached this 1860 census, maybe I wouldn't have enough information to know that he married Anna in 1858 based on the fact that they were living together and their ages and the ages of their children. So I wouldn't know that what I needed to go look for next would be this marriage record. So it allows you to, it gives you a research path or a way to do that research. It also helps you make the decision about whether or not you've jumped to conclusions or whether or not you're making the correct decisions. Because as you start to string together those citations, it starts to tell the story of your ancestor's life. You start to see where some of the holes are. You start to see where some of the conflicting evidence is, and you can start to make decisions about whether or not, yes, this is the right person, or no, this isn't the right person. So those are 5 common genealogy mistakes. As I said, they were in no particular order. There are others. I will be doing a follow-up presentation called More Common Genealogy Mistakes in August. So if you have questions about any of these common mistakes, or if there are other common mistakes that you see being made or that you fear you are making, feel free to email me at ask@ancestry.com, and I'll see if I can't work some of those into that next presentation in August. In the meantime, if you'll check the Ancestry.com Facebook page, click on the Events tab, you'll see topics and dates and times for all of the live stream presentations that we have scheduled for July. Coming up in July, we have some really cool things, including one presentation by Ancestry Ann, where she'll be talking about how fun it is to cite your sources. She'll teach you a little bit in more detail, a little bit about how to do that. Lots of other fun topics scheduled for the month of July, so we hope that you will join us then. And until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.